great Karl Marx was born on 5th May 1818 at 1:30 a.m. night as the son of Heinrich Marx and Henrietta Marx, who chanted emancipation to the downtrodden, suppressed and suffering, and to those in the lower strata of society. He was born in the town of Trier in Rhineland, which was under the administration of Germany. Even as the beginning, Karl Marx proved that he was an intelligent and capable student. Even from the boyhood, he had unusual individuality. He who led his life as a dutiful monk had good poetical taste. After Rhineland area came under the administration of Germany, the agriculturists and businessmen had no proper encouragement. The result of their sweat was captured and transferred to Germany. The people revolted. The slogans of French Revolution such as liberty, fraternity, equality were echoed. When the people objected, the officers informed the superior authorities of Berlin. Heinrich Marx was one of the organizers of the revolution. Marx, who completed his high school education in 1835 at Trier, joined the Bonn University in the same year and started his higher studies. In 1835, before months, Marx joined the Bonn University. It was decided to dissolve the local assembly proposed to be held at Frankfurt and instead, in its place, to install an actual government. The government released assault. Youths wherever seen were assaulted. In 1836, during summer vacation, Karl Marx said goodbye to Bonn University. After summer holidays, Marx spent time happily at Trier with his parents and sisters. Now his age is 18. Carl Friedrich Koppen wrote a book on the Emperor of Germany. He submitted it to Karl Marx. The young Hegelians fought against superstitious people and wrong formalities. Heinrich Marx, the father of Karl Marx, died in May 1838. The arrival of money for educational expenses of Marx came to a standstill then onwards. Jenny was living separated from Marx. Owing to her pure love towards Marx, she was not aware of the pangs of separation. It was at that time the University of Jena awarded doctorate degree to Marx and felicitated him. The name of the important town in Rhineland is Cologne. In 1842, Marx started a newspaper called Rhineland Gust. Marx was the regular writer in this paper. Marx became its chief editor within 1 year. Later, this paper became a dot in the eye of the authorities. At last, the government appointed an officer to supervise the functioning of the newspaper. That officer was a friend of Marx. Since Russia and Germany were friends, when Marx criticized the autocracy of Russia in an article, the German government decided to restrict the newspaper. In October 1843, Marx and Jenny permanently settled in Paris. The sweetness of their honeymoon did not vanish. They have just stretched their legs on family life with sweet dreams. But how Marx and Jenny will live without a permanent income? The place was a foreign country, Paris. The present work of Marx is to read and study books on economics and prepare notes. Their daughter Julia Jenny was born on 1st May 1844. She had the beauty of her mother and the intelligence of her father. Workers and the intelligentsia became closer. The intelligentsia propagated in large scale the new ideologies and revolutionary thoughts among the workers. Karl Marx participated in the meetings of workers and delivered speeches. The speeches delivered there attracted the serious attention of Marx. Marx understood the propaganda spreading misunderstanding about socialism and communism by some people. so far as Karl Marx was concerned, Engels was a reliable friend and a never-failing, vigorous and daring co-worker. Engels was the only person to understand Marx properly and to imbibe his ideologies and ideas. Marx and Engels decided to prepare a book describing the political and economic conditions existed there. For that purpose, they conducted reading and learning. On the day when the order to send Marx out of Belgium was issued, while a meeting was being held, the Belgian police surrounded the office and arrested and took away Marx. Marx wrote about the cruel behavior of the police as follows. After I was arrested and taken with the request to take steps against the denial of civil rights, my wife went to meet the President of Democratic Protection, Mr. Gordon. On 4th March 1848, Marx and family reached Paris. Marx reached there when revolutionary inspiration was waning there. The flag of independence were hoisted everywhere in Paris. The workers sang revolutionary songs out of happiness. The revolutionists belonging to other countries living in Paris told that the fire of revolution spread all over Europe. But they could not understand that the fire of revolutions was going to be extinguished within the four walls of France. The revolutionists ran away when they saw the military. The only person who did not run away was God's Chaco. Karl Marx reached Cologne and started his activities cooperating with God's Chaco. But before much time, difference of opinion raised between them. A newspaper named New Rhineland was started. This paper helped the workers very much by creating awareness. The government did not like it. They disturbed. Marx's influence among workers increased. Marx was elected as the leader of the workers. In Vienna, the capital of Austria, people's inspirations reached the edge of revolution. It was declared that Marx, who was a disloyal worker, should leave the country forever. Marx had serious lung disease. On the day when Marx had slight solace, he went near his wife, who was laid up due to illness. He patted Jenny. After that, with sorrow and love, Marx returned to his chair. Jenny, who was a cancer patient, died on 2nd December 1881. The burial was at Highgate Cemetery in London. After the death of loving wife, most of the time outside London, he showed interest to remain in solitude. Otherwise, he lived with Engels, recollecting his past life. In 1883 January, the great Karl Marx, who led courageous revolutions and fought for the world working class, said goodbye to this world. On 17th March 1883, Engels, while paying funeral rites to Marx, told as follows: "The power of the thinker, of the thinkers who lived has become standstill forever. We were not with him for only 2 minutes. He passed away in deep sleep forever, leaving the world's working class and revolutionary intelligentsia in nervousness." The burial of Marx was on 17th March 1883. Karl Marx was buried in the burial place of Jenny. Understanding the greatness of Marx, the burial of his stepmother and helper were also near to his grave. Similarly, as Charles Darwin was the founder of the theory of evolution, the founder of evolutionary doctrine of human society was the great Karl Marx, who will be remembered forever till the world lasts.
It was Xmas Day, the 25th December 1642. All over the world, people were celebrating Xmas. In England too, the people of Woolstop were enjoying the holy festival with great amount of enthusiasm. All of a sudden, wail of a lady was heard. Music and jubilation stopped suddenly. Those who went to find out the source of the cry came back and said that Asko had given birth to a preterm baby boy. The newborn was smaller than a kitten, and it was doubtful whether it would survive. The news saddened everyone over there. But her prediction proved wrong. The little boy, who was born on 25/12/1642 and who weighed less than a kitten, lived for long 85 years and became famous across the globe as the father of modern physics, Sir Isaac Newton. Newton's father died even before his birth. Since sick by birth, Newton was very quiet and did not join any games that demanded physical effort. Newton's mother Hannah was a woman of great self-confidence and high capability, so Newton was quite safe and secure under her protection. But when Newton was 2 years old, Hannah remarried a priest and left Newton under the care of his grandmother. After the death of her second husband, Hannah came back to Woodstock on the hope that her son's support will be helpful for looking after her farms. Hence, Hannah brought Newton also to the village, taking him away from the king's school. He was 14 years old then. Newton showed no interest in agriculture. Hannah got annoyed by the indifferent attitude of her son. Realizing Newton's genuine interest in science, he encouraged him to learn mathematics. There was remarkable change in Newton under the influence and guidance of Barrow. Newton, here are some treatises on the research that I did on light. You go through them carefully and understand the substance. It was Barrow who imparted knowledge to Newton about the teachings of Dane Descartes, who was popularly known as the father of modern mathematics, and those of Wallis and Copernicus. Barrow as a teacher influenced Newton to a great extent, and therefore he was largely benefited due to his nearness with him. Next year, Newton secured top rank in the scholarship examination. This facilitated Newton to continue his studies in Trinity College for some time more. In 1665, he passed his BA. Even after his graduation, he continued his studies there. While he was pursuing his highest research on light, the dreadful epidemic plague broke out in and around London and Cambridge. Consequently, the college and hostel were closed indefinitely. Newton decided to return to his village. Newton's mother was often surprised to see her son in deep thoughts, but she never interrupted him. Back in Woolsthorpe, Newton tried to find out solutions to very many problems that confronted him during his scientific excavations. He spent most of his time in repeatedly reading the books and treatises of Kepler, Copernicus and Galileo, and thereafter he used to be lost in thoughts. He passed his time in reading books. One day, it so happened that when he was sitting underneath an apple tree in his farm, a ripened apple fell near him. On hearing the sound, he awakened from his thought and looked at the fruit. Suddenly he lost in thoughts. Why did this apple fall down? Why did not it go up or sideways? What was the force that pulled the apple down? Why the obviously unsupported sun and stars escape this force and remain in the sky? Then why not the same force that detained the sun and the stars in the atmosphere did not hold the apple in the atmosphere? Is there any difference between these two forces? He got immersed in serious thoughts again. In order to get answers to these questions, Newton closely examined and studied the answers that other scientists have found out to similar questions. Newton allowed the white light to pass through a prism into a dark room. Instead of white light, what came out of prism was a multicolored ray of light similar to that found in a rainbow. Newton, always as a doubtful person by nature, had doubts on this phenomenon as well. He wondered whether the change had taken place within the prism itself. To clear the doubts, Newton allowed the multicolored rays to pass through another prism placed upside down. To his wonder, white light came out of the second prism. From the above experiment, Newton could conclude that white light could be split into a spectrum, and this multicolor can be again converted into white light by putting them together. What attracted Newton was the ability of light to travel in straight line and its inability to pass through barriers. Through his research, he came to know that light waves and sound waves travel in different ways. By the time Newton, the great genius, turned 30, he became completely silver-haired. In the excited argument, terribly damaged Newton's prestige by pointing out certain minor mistakes in his point of argument. After intense research and experiments, Newton came out with his great theories subverting the contemporary scientific knowledge prevailing at that time, subverting the retrograde beliefs and superstitions propagated by the great philosopher Aristotle and other religious scholars. In 1689, when the Parliament system of administration came into force in Britain, Newton was elected to the Parliament as the representative of the university. Even in the Parliament, Newton's mind was full of mathematics and physics. Oh, what a terrible wind! Please close that window. This was the one and only talk that Newton made during his term for 1.5 years in the Parliament. A lot of small and big paper sheets on which he prepared notes of his research work were lying in his room. One day it so happened that when Newton lost in deep thoughts, his pet dog came running and knocked down the burning candle placed very close to him. When the fire came into contact with his body, he suddenly awakened from his deep thoughts. By the time, most of the note sheets were gutted in fire. This apart, around this time, he lost his beloved mother who was so dear to him. The irreparable loss of his mother was a great shock to Newton, and he could not bear with this. Both these incidents made Newton sick and disabled. After a couple of years, although Newton got fully recovered from his illness, he was mentally shattered. Even for minor reasons, he used to become restless, and quite often he lost his temper. In the absence of adequate recognition, he got fed up with the academy life in Cambridge. Because of the political influence of his disciple Montage, in 1696, Newton was appointed in the finance department as the head of Royal Mint. In 1703, Robert Hooke died. Consequently, Newton got elected as the president of Royal Society. During this time, he published an important book, Optics, on light. In 1705, Newton was conferred with the honor Sir. Thus, Newton became Sir Isaac Newton. In the year 1725, the third edition of Principia was also published. On 2nd March 1727, Newton made a fantastic speech in the Royal Society with great enthusiasm. That emotional speech made Newton sick and incapacitated. From next day onwards, he became bedridden. After a wonderful and eventful career of long 85 years, on 20th March 1727, the great scientific intellect of all time left this world. His mortal remains got buried in Westminster Abbey with all national honor that a great scientist richly deserved. I don't know what the world would think of me, but as far as I am concerned, I am a little boy who goes on searching shells and oysters along the shore of the ocean of knowledge. What all strange mysteries lay unknown deep in the sea of wisdom.
Rabindranath Tagore was born on May 7, 1861 as the 14th son of Saint Devendranath Tagore and Sharada Devi. Dwarakanath Tagore was his grandfather. He was a close friend and associate of Raja Ram Mohan Rai, who was the founder of the Brahma Samaj. Dwarakanath Tagore's house was in the northeast part of Kolkata in the street Chitpur. The name of the house was Jera Shanko. Dwarakanath Tagore was a well-known and established businessman as well as very much of a humanitarian who was kind to the less fortunate ones. But his son was a man of liberated views and very modern in his attitudes. The son declared that as long as the blind beliefs and bad rituals survive in the country, no liberation was possible for India. Ravi's mother was not in good health. Moreover, she was overburdened with the responsibilities of home and children. In fact, it was his eldest sister who brought up Rabindranath. She had a son, Satyan, who was slightly elder than Rabindranath. Rabindranath's playmates of those years were his senior brother Somendran and Satyan. There was a servant named Ishwaran who had a sort of cleansing mania. As soon as they returned from school, Satyan would tell them colorful stories of the happenings in school, which awakened the imagination of the young Rabindranath. He developed a strong wish to join school. Though he was not old enough for school, his father agreed, and he took young Rabindranath to the then famous school called Normal School. He came to be known as Saint Devendranath because of his spiritual leanings. In the morning before going to school and in the evening after school, Rabindranath had special tuition. On holidays, he had music tuition. Altogether, he lost interest in studies. Understanding Rabindra's difficulty to go back to school, his father took him along when he went to Himalayas next. On their way, they dropped at Bolpur and lived in the Shanti Niketan there. It was a well spread out place of around 300 acres of village land. Shanti Niketan stood in the center of this grand place. Then they continued their journey of Himalayas, visiting the holy places, and then reached Dale House. From there, the saint sent his son with a servant back to Kolkata. Whenever he had time, he spent it reading books. But after 1.5 years, he returned home without taking a degree. But his father, the saint, did not discourage him at all. He let him go his way. Most of the time he spent engaged in music and literature. Vatmikli Pratibha, Sandhya Sangeetam, Prabhata Sangeetam, etc. were published during this time. All of them came out in family magazines. He also wrote short stories and drama at this time. His poetry collection, Kavya Kanini, also came out around this time. A girl was born to them when Rabindranath was 25 years old. After 2 years, a girl was born to them and then a boy. When he had to share the responsibility of bringing them up, Rabindranath got interested in children's literature. He used to tell stories to the children. His sister advised him to collect and publish his own stories and poems that appeared in the Balak magazine. He thought Shalida was not a good place to educate the children. 3 more children were born to them there, 2 daughters and 1 son. In the end, he decided to give his children private tuition. Ravi also taught them the classics. Kritivasan's Ramayana and Kashiram's Mahabharata were very popular in Bengal at that time. Some people asked him how he could educate his grown-up son at home still. They advised his son to obtain a degree through formal education. Rabindranath considered all this and decided not to be a block to his son's intellectual betterment. Bengal had given birth to a lot of noble people. It was the source of the social renaissance and nationalism. The leaders called up the youngsters to fight against the British rule. Shanti Niketan was entrusted to his followers and he took up the stand to unite the public irrespective of caste or religion. Unity was the only weapon against the British. The youth sang the songs of Rabindranath and stood against the British Raj. All over the nation, the protests against the partition strengthened. At last, the partition was taken away. Incessant work made him sick, and to recover, he shifted his residence to Shelida once more. During this period of rest, he translated his poems to English. In 1912 May, he went to England. Even in the ship, he continued the translation work. Gandhiji was the founder of that school, and after a while, Gandhiji in person visited Shanti Niketan. The same year, Rabindranath got the Sir honour from the King of Britain. In 1916, he visited Japan. It was winter there. Rabindranath appreciated the aesthetic sense of the Japanese people. He said there is a lot for Indians to learn from them. He gave a lecture on nationalism at the Tokyo University. Even though the World War had ended, Britain did not give India any freedom. The agitation against British rule gained momentum. Gandhiji said each Indian has a duty to fight against the Rowlatt Act. To view all humans alike was its high practice. Rabindranath gave all his material possessions, including the rights of his books, and the Nobel Prize to the university. Indian languages and foreign language were given equal prominence there. Arts were also given high priority. The people living around the institution were Shantals. Tagore wanted to bring the tribal clans to the mainstream. To make it more effective and organized, he opened a center called Shri Niketan. So he was taken back to Kolkata, and he was better and stayed at Shanti Niketan. In 1841, Vishwa Bharati started making arrangements to celebrate Tagore's 80th birthday. He participated in it but was too weak to enjoy it. On July 30th, a surgery was scheduled. After that, he was brought home unconscious. On August 7th, noon, the great talent took leave for good. That same day, the last rites were performed on the banks of the Ganges. At Nitom Ghat, the unique talent of Indian literature became a handful of sacred ashes.
Neelakandan Bhattadripad, a member of Ezhumava Illam of Kandannur village of Kunnathnadu, was the husband of Princess Umabai Thambirati. Bhattadripad was proficient in astrology and had deep insight and a thorough knowledge of all Vedas. But these couple had no issues for a pretty long time. The royal couple underwent deep anguish. But Bhattadripad and Umabai Thambirati were genuine and ardent devotees of God. After a long wait, their sincere prayers fetched positive result. The princess gave birth to a male child with most poignant eyes, broad forehead and a long bent nose. His complexion was dusky. He was named Ravi Varma. Soothsayers predicted that the boy had an extraordinary horoscope. Astrologers predicted that the boy one day would become famous the world over. Ever since his childhood, he displayed extraordinary and wonderful taste in music. At the age of 5, he started his basic education. Ever since his childhood, he started displaying astounding intelligence. Expert pundits were deployed in the palace to impart knowledge to the little prince Ravi Varma. Over the time, with hard work and commitment to art, Ravi Varma could earn name as a perfect and unique painter. The hectic and tireless efforts put in by the prince painter was beyond words. If his first preceptor was his maternal uncle in Kilimanur Palace, it was a library and picture gallery of Ailam Tirunal that helped him to be a famous artist across the world. Besides Rajaraja Varma and Ailam Tirunal, Kerala Varma Veliya Koyithampiran had also been very helpful to Ravi Varma to be shot into prominence as a great painter. Although much was achieved, he was not fully confident of handling the creative work in its entirety. He could not also come across a preceptor of his satisfaction who was capable of imparting more details on oil painting. In those days, Ramaswamy Naidu was the one and only master painter who had a mastery over oil painting. Naidu, who hailed from Madurai, had a picture gallery of his own in the palace. He, being an uncrowned king in the field of oil painting, as he was known in those days, had a contemptuous attitude towards other artists. He was afraid that he would be Ravi Varma, observe and learn the intricacies of paintings. Jensen was under the false impression that Ravi Varma would not be able to grasp much by observing the painting work. But mere observation was more than enough for Ravi Varma, the genius. If the original paintings of Ravi Varma are closely noticed, one thing could be understood, that he had done the paintings after keen observation. In 1870, he shot into prominence as a great painter. He, however, decided to take to painting as a profession. But before this, he wanted to wander across the state on pilgrimage. He particularly wanted to visit the Mookambika temple at Kollur to pay obeisance before Saraswati, the goddess of art. The team of pilgrimage soon reached Calicut. They halted there for a couple of days for rest. Mr. Palad Krishna Menon, the father-in-law of Sir Sri Shankaran Nair, was a sub-collector of Calicut at that time. Ravi Varma went and introduced himself to him. He painted the portrait of Palad Krishna Menon and his family members. Ravi Varma was awarded with 2 citations of 2 by 3 feet measurement and gold medals for his outstanding paintings. Ravi Varma was never interested in bargaining and demanding money for his paintings. His first and foremost aim of painting pictures was his own satisfaction. Ravi Varma's younger brother was looking after his financial matters. He was also in charge of his press at Bombay. A good number of outstanding paintings were published from this press at Bombay. The press was running at a loss, as Ravi Varma was subjected to cheating by some of his friends at Bombay. It was in dire straits. In 1903, Ravi Varma was deep in debt to the tune of approximately 1 lakh rupees.
A great philanthropist who taught the world the dignity of labor, an architect of a great nation who toiled for abolishing slavery from the mind of the downtrodden, and who tirelessly worked with great amount of vision to achieve the goal. An able administrator who accepted the challenges of the new world and fought against them. An ordinary human being who could conquer the peak of success with sheer hard work, Abraham Lincoln. A peep into the eventful life of this great personality. Abraham Lincoln was born on 12th February 1809. His birthplace was a wooden cabin in a small village near Hodgenville, Kentucky. Mrs. Thomas Lincoln used to gently swing little Abe backwards and forwards while she chatted with his little sister Sarah. Dressed in a linsey woolsey shirt, 2-year-old Abe would follow his sister as she carried a pail of fresh water from the rock spring not far from their cabin on the Singing Spring Farm. An incident that happened when he was 4 years old. I had been fishing one day and caught a little fish which I was taking home. I met a soldier on the road. Having been told at home by my parents that we must be kind to the soldiers, I gave him my fish. 5-year-old Abraham had very few playthings. On 19th July 1814, at a sale at Thomas Hill's place, Thomas Lincoln bought homemade toy truck wagon for his son. Abraham's sister Sarah, who was 2 years older than he was, had married Aaron Grisby. She died in childbirth a year and a half later. When he heard the shocking news, Abe sat down in the doorway and cried. As the fireside was Lincoln's study by night, the shade of the white oak was his classroom by day. He thought that time has come to stop farm work and pursue greater things in life. During the presidential campaign of 1860, Abe, who had proved his skill as a woodsman with an axe, was known as a rail splitter candidate. At New Orleans, after a month's trip down the Mississippi by flatboat, Lincoln beheld the true horror of human slavery when he saw Negroes in chains. To his companions, he said, "Slavery ran the iron into me then and there." Seeing the slave auction revolted him so much that he exclaimed to Dunton of Foot, "Boy, let us get away from this. If ever I get a chance to hit the slavery, I will hit it hard." The old state capitol is still there. Lincoln took his seat as one of 55 house members, having arrived by stagecoach. He received the welcome income of $3 a day. By observing the skilled politicians and lobbyists closely, he learned much about his new life as a public servant. Even 3 months before Lincoln was nominated for the presidency, he was little known in New York. But what he said on the evening he spoke to 1,500 people at the Cooper Institute helped to make him president. Before the 1860 Illinois State Republican Convention at Decatur, Lincoln's friend Richard Oglesby was talking to John Hanks and learned about the rail fence Lincoln and Hanks had built back in 1830 west of Decatur. Oglesby got the idea of taking Hanks out to the old Lincoln farm to get some of the rails. He had John carry a couple of them into the convention hall with a banner. Family watched and grieved, but nothing could be done for him. Everyone waited tearfully through the night until the first streaks of dawn lit the somber room. Death came at 7:22 that morning. Slowly, the Lincoln funeral train made its way from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois. Day and night, town after town, the mourning people anxiously waited, stared, scattered flowers, built bonfires. Flags were draped and bands played dirges, while guns were fired and church bells tolled, showing the overwhelming heartbreak of a nation that was taking part as the largest display of grief the country had ever seen.
Sweden was one among the biggest countries in Europe. Its capital, Stockholm, was a big city with thick population. In those days, poverty was a common phenomenon across the continent. People had to suffer a lot from many diseases. The unhygienic lifestyle out of poverty caused easy spread of epidemics. It was then a military engineer named Emanuel Nobel, descended from Nebelov, a small Swedish village, to Stockholm. He lived in a small house at Nolensgatan, a small street of the poor in the city. It was there on October 21st, 1833, that Alfred Nobel was born as the third son to Emanuel Nobel and Henriette Alsell Nobel. Nobel's family was in dire poverty those days. They were in great financial crisis. They had to face serious threats from their moneylenders, and due to this calamity, Emanuel left for Russia with the consent of his wife and children. When Alfred was 17, he could speak in Swedish, German, Russian, French, and English. He had an intense interest in English literature. This caused agony in his father. One day, he asked Alfred, "Alfred, are you trying to keep away from chemistry? Please don't do that. I have plans to take you in my company at St. Petersburg." "Father, it's true that I'm much interested in literature, but it doesn't mean that I dislike chemistry," he answered at once. "I want you to be well educated. We have a plan to send you out to some other countries for better education. I would like you to become an engineer. So please take care about your studies." Alfred was so happy as he liked traveling. Once, while entering the laboratory, he told his brother, "I have no problem in the manufacture of nitroglycerin." "But it seems that you are fighting strong with the mixture," said Ludwig, who accompanied his brother. "You are right, because I was trying to make a mixture with lesser temperature to avoid an explosion," Alfred explained. "Okay, but how can you make the mixture explode at a particular time and in a particular place?" Robert asked. "That itself is the real challenge of this. Let all of us go out to perform this experiment." They went out of the laboratory. Alfred filled nitroglycerin in a test tube and closed it tight with a lid. He also filled a container with gunpowder and placed the test tube on it. He passed a gas through the test tube and threw it away in a drain. As a result, there occurred an explosion which shook the whole area. On that day, Alfred wrote to his father, "I'm coming to Stockholm. You are interested in explosions. We shall conduct experiments on this together." He went to Sweden, and after a few months, when he was walking through the streets of Stockholm, he could recollect the memories of his childhood. She left Alfred one day without even informing him. Alfred became alone once again. He made friendship with another woman in Austria. He met her in a shop and she was a flower seller. She was only 20, but Alfred was 40 years old. She was not educated and was immoral. Alfred was always interested in doing experiments. He spent most of the time in his laboratory. One day, he said to his assistant, George, "Dynamite brought me a lot of success in my life, but I am not happy with its birth. So many people use blasting oil for various purposes. Shall we work for some time in the laboratory?" asked George. Alfred agreed. He was interested in his work in spite of his tiredness and pain. This happened in the year 1875, and he patented this in 1876. When his work increased, Alfred decided to change his laboratory from Winter Garden to Sevran in northern suburb of Paris. He started thinking of utilizing the blasting gelatin for military purposes. George was there to assist him. At that time, scientists all over the world were in search of new and effective methods to make explosives. Alfred once again showed the world the power of nitroglycerin to explode by inventing smokeless gunpowder. If dynamite is loaded in a gun, its range and power to hit the target will become enormous, he thought. To experiment this, Alfred filled dynamite in a cannon and shot it. He performed this experiment in a place not so far from his laboratory. The French government started suspecting Alfred's activities. The French researchers accused him as a spy. They asked Alfred to leave the country. Alfred decided to move to San Remo in Italy. He bought a big house beside the seashore. Alfred had a lot of problems in his life. Though he was blessed with success and wealth, he became unhealthy due to lack of rest and sleep throughout his life. Long and continuous journeys performed by him had already weakened his body. He also had emotional stress out of his loneliness. His mother died in 1889, and in the same year he lost his brother Ludwig. He had nobody to share his feelings with. He felt happy to work with Alfred. He considered Alfred one among his beloved. Alfred Nobel set aside the bulk of his wealth to establish a fund for prizes to award for eminence in the field of physics, chemistry, medical science or physiology, and literature. Economics also was included in the list later. Alfred also worked hard to unite the countries. The Nobel Prize is today the biggest award an individual can earn for his efforts. The Nobel Prize has been identified as a true recognition for one's greatness. Alfred Nobel was not only a great man, but also a generous human being. He died of a stroke on the 10th of December 1896. It is on this day every year that the Nobel Prizes are awarded.
Wilbur Wright was born to Milton Wright and Susan Wright on April 16, 1867. His birth was in a farm in Indiana in the United States as their third son. After Wilbur's birth, Orville was born to his parents on an August 19th, 4 years later at Dayton in Ohio. Change is the nature of destiny. Milton Wright, their father, might have never even imagined that the toy glider presented by him to Wilbur and Orville would have been a turning point in their life. They found their grandfather Coyoner's farm a best place for their experiments and adventures. It was from him that these youngsters had a fascination for machines. Their life drowned into deep sadness as their beloved mother, Susan, passed away due to heart-related disease. Wilbur took care of her day and night when she was ill. Their father, Bishop Milton, had a printing press. Orville used a self-made woodcut in the press, and later both of them took keen interest in printing. After leaving school in 1890, Orville decided to earn, and Wilbur joined him. They started publishing a paper every week, Wilbur being the editor and Orville the publisher. They continued the press for 10 years, and during these times too, their fascination with machines continued. They became interested in bicycles. At that time, bicycles used to cost penny and farthings, they being the currency of England. Orville bought a cycle, the old cycle with bigger front wheel and smaller back wheel. Its seat was 5 feet above the ground. It was a bit dangerous. They were haunted by their dream. They did a lot of research and hard work to fulfill their dream. They spent hours watching the flying birds. They learned a bird can fly up, down and to sides. One day, when they were observing the birds, a question arose in their mind. What kind of pressure is holding these birds in air? Orville was comparing the secrets of flying with the flying methods of birds. Like his students learned magic from the magician, he was learning the magic of flying from the ultimate magician, nature. Spring was out and summer came in. Kitchog in North Carolina was a sandy land. It was the dawn of summer season. These brothers wanted to implement their dreams. They began to create their dream machine, the glider. They selected this place as a coastal area close to Ohio. Kitchog was a flat sandy island which separated Atlantic Ocean from the coastal lagoon. There were a weather station and 2 life-saving stations, a post office and a few houses there. It was the best place for their experiments. The wind was blowing in Kitchog. They checked the weight of their glider. They tied a chain around it, made it ready for flying. They wanted an assistant. They understood the postman Bill Tate was the apt man for it. They realized that what they made is far better than anyone they were searching for. It was ready in 6 weeks' time. Then came the problem of the propeller. But shipbuilders never used to draw the design of one and keep it with them. Depending on the speed of the propeller, air from the front blew backwards and the machine will move to the front. This was the basic theory that worked. Wilbur and Orville decided that only one of them will fly because if anything happens to one, the other will be safe to continue the mission. Who will fly first? They tossed a coin and Wilbur won. Wilbur sat on the right wing seat of the pilot and Orville made the rest of the things right. Their fingers were crossed, the engine started, and it rose from the ground, and it could also be landed back. For almost 3.5 seconds, Wilbur was on air. But government at that time was not that far-sighted like them. Later, Germany and France began to inquire about this, and this made Wright brothers internationally famous. In 1908, Wilbur flew the aircraft and the French people were dumbstruck seeing this. He literally conquered them. But fate never gave it all easy to them. By 1908 September 17, a pilot and a 26-year-old Thomas Selfridge, a lieutenant, also got into a plane with Orville and it crashed to the floor. Selfridge had a head injury and he died later that day itself in the hospital.